My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and 3 days ago I discovered that my best employee, someone I considered family, had stolen $20,000 from my business account to gamble online. But that's not even the worst part of this story. It was a typical Tuesday morning in Chicago when my world completely fell apart. The autumn wind was howling outside my small marketing consultancy office on North Michigan Avenue, and I was sipping my usual vanilla latte when my accountant, David, called with a tone I'd never heard before. "Sarah, we need to talk, now." If you're enjoying this story and can relate to the challenges of running a small business, please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to content creators like me, sharing real experiences. I'd built Mitchell Marketing from nothing over the past 8 years. Starting in my cramped studio apartment with just a laptop and a dream, I'd grown it into a thriving consultancy with 12 employees. We specialized in helping local restaurants and small retailers build their online presence, and I was genuinely proud of what we'd accomplished. The office buzzed with its usual energy that morning. Jenny Rodriguez, my office manager, and the person at the center of this nightmare, was at her desk as always, arriving before anyone else. She'd been with me for 4 years, longer than anyone except my business partner, Mike. Jenny was 28, single, and had this infectious laugh that could brighten even our most stressful client meetings. "Morning, boss," she called out with her usual smile as I walked past her desk. "Coffee's fresh, and I've got those Henderson reports ready for your review." I smiled back, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd been systematically draining our business account for the past 3 months. When David arrived 20 minutes later, his face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly as he set his laptop on my desk. "Sarah, I need you to sit down and look at something." The spreadsheet he showed me made no sense at first. Transaction after transaction, all originating from our main business account, going to something called Quick Pay Solutions and digital transfer services. Each withdrawal was carefully timed, always on Fridays, always after banking hours, always in amounts just under our daily transfer limit. "David, what am I looking at?" "These are unauthorized transactions, Sarah. Someone with access to your business banking has been moving money out systematically. We're talking about nearly $20,000 over 12 weeks. The room started spinning. I felt like I was going to be sick. That's impossible. Only 3 people have access to that account. You, me, and... My voice trailed off as we both turned to look through my office's glass wall at Jenny, who was cheerfully chatting with Marcus from our creative team, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. The next hour was a blur of phone calls, bank statements, and growing horror as the evidence mounted. The timestamps on the transactions matched perfectly with Jenny's work schedule. The IP address traced back to her home computer. Even worse, David discovered she'd been falsifying deposit records to hide the missing money, creating fake client payments that never actually existed. "How could she think she'd get away with this?" I whispered, staring at the numbers that represented not just money, but months of late nights, weekend work, and sacrifices I'd made to keep this business running. David pulled up another screen. "Sarah, there's more." I tracked where the money went. What I saw next changed everything I thought I knew about Jenny Rodriguez. Every single stolen dollar had gone to online gambling sites, poker, sports betting, slot machines. But here's the part that still keeps me awake at night. The transaction records showed she'd actually won big early on. There were deposits back to her personal account totaling nearly $40,000 in her first month of gambling. She could have stopped. She could have returned our money and walked away with a $20,000 profit. Instead, she'd gambled it all away, and then stolen even more, chasing the high of that early win. I sat in my office for another 30 minutes, trying to process what I'd learned. Through the glass, I watched Jenny working diligently, answering phones, organizing files, being the model employee she'd always been. How long had she been living this double life? How had I missed the signs? Finally, I knew I had to confront her. My hands were trembling as I walked to her desk, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jenny, could you come into my office, please? We need to discuss something." The look of confusion on her face seemed so genuine. "Of course, Sarah. Is everything okay? You look pale." as she followed me into my office and I closed the door behind us. I had no idea that the conversation we were about to have would destroy both of our lives in ways I never could have imagined. Jenny, I need you to tell me about quick pay solutions and digital transfer services. The moment those words left my mouth, I watched Jenny's face transform. The color drained from her cheeks, her confident posture crumbled, and her hands started shaking so violently she had to grip the arms of her chair. Sarah, I don't know what you mean. But her voice cracked on every word. I turned my laptop screen toward her, showing the bank statements David had compiled. $20,000, Jenny. Taken from our business account over 3 months. Every transaction traced back to your home computer, timed perfectly with your work schedule. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside my office, I could hear the normal sounds of our workplace. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the coffee machine brewing another pot. Life continuing as normal while mine was falling apart. Jenny's breathing became shallow and rapid. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then, to my complete shock, she started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but this horrible, broken sound that made my skin crawl. You know what the crazy part is? She said, tears streaming down her face. I won, Sarah. I actually won big. What are you talking about? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving mascara streaks across her cheeks. The first time I took money from the account, it was just $500. I was behind on rent, my mom needed surgery, and I panicked. I thought I could just borrow it and pay it back before anyone noticed. I remained silent, letting her talk. Part of me was furious, but another part was heartbroken watching this person I cared about completely unravel. I put it on a basketball game, Bulls versus Lakers. The odds were crazy good, and I'd been following both teams all season. When the Bulls won, I had $1,200. She laughed that awful laugh again. I should have stopped there, paid back the $500 and learned my lesson. But you didn't. I couldn't, Sarah. Do you understand what it feels like to turn $500 into $1,200 in 2 hours? It was like I'd found the solution to everything. All my financial problems, all my stress about money, gone in one bet. Jenny stood up and started pacing in front of my desk, her words coming faster now. So I took another $1,000, then $2,000. By the end of the first month, I'd taken $8,000 total, but I'd won almost $40,000. I was ahead. I was going to pay everything back and still have enough to pay off my student loans, help my mom, maybe even take a real vacation for the first time in my adult life. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than I'd imagined. What happened to the $40,000, Jenny? She stopped pacing and looked directly at me, her eyes red and swollen. I got greedy, and then I got desperate. Over the next 20 minutes, Jenny told me everything. How she'd convinced herself she was a skilled gambler after those early wins. How she'd developed elaborate systems for picking winners, studying statistics late into the night. How the winning streak had ended as suddenly as it began. And she'd lost the entire $40,000 in a single catastrophic weekend. I kept thinking I could win it back, she said, slumping back into her chair. Just one more bet, one more game. I started taking larger amounts from the account because I needed bigger bets to recover the losses. Every Friday, I'd tell myself this was the weekend I'd fix everything. Jenny, this isn't just about money. You falsified records. You created fake invoices to hide what you were doing. This is fraud. The word fraud hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over, sobbing uncontrollably. I know what I did, and I hate myself for it. I wake up every morning hoping this is all a nightmare. I haven't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. I can't eat. I can't think straight. I can't. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. Sarah, you have to believe me. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could fix it. I thought I was smart enough to win it back before anyone found out. I wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me did. But I also thought about the sleepless nights I'd spent worrying about cash flow, the client projects we might not be able to complete, the other employees whose jobs could be at risk because of her actions. Where does this leave us, Jenny? The money is gone. Our Q4 budget is destroyed. I have payroll to meet, rent to pay, client commitments to fulfill. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I talked to a lawyer yesterday." My heart sank even further. A lawyer? I wanted to understand my options, legally speaking. "Sarah, I'm going to face criminal charges for this, aren't I?" The question hung in the air between us. I hadn't even considered the legal implications yet. I was still processing the betrayal and the financial damage. But she was right. This wasn't just an employee mistake or a judgment error. This was embezzlement, fraud, and theft on a scale that would absolutely attract law enforcement attention. "I don't know, Jenny. I honestly don't know what happens next." She nodded, still crying but more quietly now. "The lawyer said I should probably expect to be arrested once you report this. He said with the amount involved and the falsified records, I'm looking at felony charges, possibly federal charges since some of the gambling sites are offshore." The weight of the situation was becoming overwhelming. This wasn't just about my business anymore. This was about Jenny's entire future, her family, her life. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "If you were having financial problems, why didn't you just ask for help? We could have worked something out, set up a payment plan, anything." She shook her head sadly. "Because I was ashamed. Because I'd always been the responsible one, the one who had everything together. Because asking for help felt like admitting I was a failure." As I looked at this broken woman sitting across from my desk, someone who'd been at my birthday parties, who'd worked late nights beside me on crucial projects, who'd celebrated every business milestone with genuine joy, I realized that both of our lives had been permanently changed by her decisions. The hardest part was knowing that in a few hours I'd have to decide whether to call the police and destroy what was left of Jenny's life, or try to find another way forward that might save my business without sending her to prison. But I was about to learn that the choice wasn't really mine to make, because Jenny Rodriguez had one more devastating secret she hadn't shared yet. If this story is hitting close to home, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps others find these important conversations about trust and betrayal in the workplace. "Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you." Those words made my blood run cold. How could there possibly be more? Jenny wiped her face with a tissue and took a shaky breath. "The gambling. It didn't start with your money." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "I've been gambling online for almost 2 years. It started small, $5 here, $10 there on football games. But over time, it got bigger. Much bigger." She pulled out her phone and opened what looked like a banking app. Before I ever touched the business account, I'd already lost my entire savings. $18,000 that I'd been saving for a house down payment, gone. Then I maxed out my credit cards, another $12,000. I took a personal loan for $15,000 more. The numbers were staggering. "Jenny, you're telling me you lost $45,000 of your own money before you ever stole from me?" $52,000, actually. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I also borrowed money from friends and family, telling them it was for various emergencies. My mom gave me $3,000, thinking it was for car repairs. My sister lent me $4,000 for what I said were medical bills." I was speechless. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't just someone who'd made a desperate mistake. She was someone with a serious gambling addiction who'd been systematically destroying her life for years. "But here's the part that's going to make this so much worse for both of us," she continued, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her phone. "I didn't just steal from you, Sarah." My heart stopped. "What? Remember the Morrison project last month? The $15,000 retainer they paid up front?" She couldn't look at me as she spoke. "I diverted that payment to my personal account before it ever hit our books. And the Chen restaurant renovation, their $8,000 deposit went missing too." The room started spinning again. These weren't just internal company funds she'd stolen. These were client payments. Money that belonged to people who'd trusted us with their business dreams and financial investments. "Jenny, that's over $40,000 when you include what you took from our operating account." $43,200. The precision of her answer told me she'd been tracking every stolen penny. "And Sarah, the Morrison and Chen projects are supposed to launch next week. They're expecting deliverables that we can't complete because the money they paid for those services is gone." I had to put my head in my hands. This wasn't just about my business surviving anymore. This was about legal obligations to clients, contractual commitments, and potential lawsuits that could destroy everything I'd built. How were you planning to handle the client deliverables? I wasn't sleeping, working 18-hour days trying to figure out how to deliver their projects without the resources their payments should have provided. I was hoping to use some of the fake invoice payments I'd created to temporarily cover costs. But she gestured helplessly at the bank statements. It all fell apart too quickly. The phone on my desk rang, making us both jump. The caller ID showed Morrison Industries, probably calling about their project timeline. I let it go to voicemail, but the message was clear. The consequences of Jenny's actions were already starting to ripple outward. "There's more," she said quietly. I couldn't take much more, but I nodded for her to continue. "The gambling sites I was using, some of them aren't exactly legal in Illinois. The lawyer I spoke with yesterday warned me that I might also be facing charges related to illegal online gambling, especially since I was using business funds for it." She showed me her phone screen, which displayed a confusing array of gambling apps and websites. I was betting on everything: sports, poker, even those online slot machines. Some nights I'd lose thousands of dollars in a few hours, then spend the rest of the night trying to win it back. As she talked, I started recognizing signs I'd missed over the past few months. The times she'd seemed exhausted and distracted, the occasions when she'd been unusually emotional or stressed, the way she'd started working later and later, which I'd attributed to dedication, but now realized was probably her staying to manipulate financial records. "Jenny, are you getting help for this? This is clearly an addiction." "I know it is." After I talked to the lawyer yesterday, I called a gambling addiction hotline. They gave me information about support groups and counseling programs. She pulled a crumpled business card from her purse. "There's a Gamblers Anonymous meeting tonight in Schaumburg. I was planning to go." The irony was heartbreaking. She was finally ready to get help for her addiction, but it was too late to prevent the catastrophic consequences of her actions. "Sarah, I need you to know that I never intended to hurt you or the business. In my mind, I was always going to win big and pay everything back with interest. I had these elaborate fantasies about surprising you with a bonus payment to the business account, maybe even enough to expand the office or hire more staff." I understood the psychology behind her thinking, but it didn't change the reality of our situation. "Jenny, I have to ask, is there any possibility of recovering any of this money? Any wins that haven't been gambled away yet?" She shook her head sadly. "I'm actually in debt beyond what I stole from you. The gambling sites let you play on credit, and I owe them almost $8,000 on top of everything else. They've been calling and texting constantly for the past 2 weeks. The scope of Jenny's financial destruction was staggering. She'd not only stolen from me and our clients, but she'd also buried herself in additional debt that would take years to recover from, assuming she could find a way to earn income while dealing with potential criminal charges." "What happens now?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "I think you have to report this to the police, Sarah. I've consulted with the lawyer, and he says trying to handle this privately could actually make things worse for both of us. With client funds involved, there are legal reporting requirements you have to meet." She was right, but the thought of making that call felt like signing her death warrant. Jenny Rodriguez, the woman who'd helped me build my dream business, was asking me to take the actions that would likely send her to prison. "There's one more thing," she said, and I braced myself for yet another revelation. "My mom doesn't know any of this yet. She's 73 years old, and her health isn't great. When this becomes public, when the media gets hold of it," she didn't need to finish. I understood. This wasn't just going to destroy Jenny's life. It was going to devastate her entire family and everyone who cared about her. As we sat there in the silence of my office, both of us crying for different reasons, I realized that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of my business, but the trajectory of multiple lives. The decisions I made today would echo forward for years, affecting Jenny, her family, our clients, and my other employees. But I was about to discover that some of those decisions had already been made for me. The knock on my office door came at exactly 2:47 p.m. I remember the time so precisely because I'd been staring at the clock, trying to work up the courage to make the phone calls I knew I had to make, to the police, to our clients, to my business insurance company. "Come in," I called, expecting it to be Mike, my business partner, who I'd texted to come in for an emergency meeting. Instead, two people in business suits walked into my office. The woman flashed a badge. "Ms. Mitchell? I'm Detective Lisa Reeves, Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. This is Agent Torres from the FBI. We need to speak with you about irregularities in your business accounts." My heart sank. Someone had already reported this. Jenny, who was still sitting across from my desk, went completely white. "Oh, God," she whispered. Detective Reeves looked between us. "Ms. Rodriguez, I presume. We've been trying to reach you at your home address." "How do you know about this?" I managed to ask. Agent Torres opened a folder. "Your bank flagged the suspicious transaction patterns 3 days ago as part of their anti-fraud monitoring. When they saw the systematic withdrawals to gambling sites, combined with the amounts involved, they were legally required to file a suspicious activity report." Jenny started hyperventilating. I moved to sit beside her, putting my hand on her shoulder, despite everything she'd done. "Breathe, Jenny. Just breathe." Detective Reeves sat down across from us. "Ms. Mitchell, we understand this is difficult, but we need to walk through what you've discovered and get your statement about the extent of the financial damage." Over the next hour, I explained everything: the missing operating funds, the diverted client payments, the falsified records. The officers took detailed notes, photographed the bank statements, and asked questions that made it clear this was a serious criminal investigation. "Ms. Rodriguez," Agent Torres said gently, "you have the right to remain silent and to have an attorney present before answering any questions. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As he read her the Miranda rights, the reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a business problem anymore. This was a federal criminal case. "I want to cooperate," Jenny said quietly. "I want to tell you everything." Her lawyer, a tired-looking man named David Brennan, who arrived 20 minutes later, tried to convince her to stay quiet, but Jenny was determined to confess. Over the next 2 hours, she detailed every transaction, every falsified record, every lie she'd told to cover her tracks. "The worst part," she told the officers, "is that Sarah trusted me completely. She gave me access to everything because she believed I was loyal and honest. I betrayed not just her business, but her friendship." Detective Reeves looked at me. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to ask, did you have any suspicions about Ms. Rodriguez's activities?" I thought back over the past few months, searching for signs I should have noticed. She'd been working longer hours, staying late to catch up on paperwork. A few times, I found her at her desk when I came in early, like she'd been there all night. But I thought she was just dedicated to her job. "Were there any behavioral changes?" "She seemed more stressed lately, maybe a little distracted, but we'd been busy with several large client projects, so I attributed it to work pressure." I paused, remembering something else. Actually, now that I think about it, she'd started volunteering to handle all the client payment processing. She said she wanted to streamline our invoicing system. Agent Torres made a note. "That's consistent with what we typically see in embezzlement cases. The perpetrator often seeks to control the financial processes to avoid detection." As the interview continued, more devastating details emerged. The FBI had already contacted several of the gambling sites Jenny had used, and the pattern of her addiction was even worse than she'd admitted to me. "Ms. Rodriguez," Detective Reeves said, consulting her notes, "our preliminary investigation shows gambling losses totaling over $70,000 across multiple platforms over the past 18 months. That's significantly more than the amount you stole from Ms. Mitchell's business." Jenny nodded miserably. "I told Sarah about losing my savings and maxing out credit cards, but I didn't tell her about the personal loans, the money I borrowed from friends and family, or the cash advances I took against future credit limits." The scope of her financial self-destruction was staggering. She'd essentially ruined her entire life chasing gambling wins that never materialized. "What happens next?" I asked. Agent Torres closed his folder. "Ms. Rodriguez will be formally arrested and charged. Given the amounts involved and the fact that client funds were diverted, we're looking at federal wire fraud charges in addition to state embezzlement charges. She'll be booked, arraigned, and then released on bond pending trial." What about restitution? That will be part of any plea agreement or sentencing. But realistically, Ms. Rodriguez appears to have no assets and significant debts. Recovery of the stolen funds is unlikely. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Jenny destroyed her life, but she'd probably destroyed my business too. $43,000 might not sound like a fortune, but for a small consultancy like mine, it represented months of operating expenses and the resources needed to fulfill our client commitments. As the officers prepared to arrest Jenny, she turned to me one last time. "Sarah, I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I need you to know that I never stopped caring about you in this business. Even when I was stealing from you, I was telling myself I was going to make it right." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "Jenny, please get help. Real help. This addiction has already cost you everything. Don't let it cost you your life too." They led her away in handcuffs, and suddenly, my office felt impossibly empty and quiet. Mike arrived just as they were taking her to the police car, and I had to explain everything to him all over again. "Sarah, this is terrible, but we need to focus on damage control," he said after hearing the full story. "We have client obligations to meet, payroll to make, and a business to save." He was right, but I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problems facing us. "Mike, I don't even know where to start. We have the Morrison project launching Monday, and they've already paid us $15,000 that's gone. The Chen project is supposed to go live next Friday. How do we deliver projects we no longer have the resources to complete?" "We figure it out," he said firmly. "We use our personal savings if we have to, we work around the clock, and we find a way to honor our commitments to our clients. Because if we don't, Jenny's actions won't just destroy her life, they'll destroy ours too." As I sat there looking at the empty chair where Jenny had confessed her crimes just hours earlier, I realized that my nightmare was just beginning. The arrest was only the first step in what would be a long, difficult journey to rebuild both my business and my ability to trust people. But I was about to learn that Jenny's arrest would bring consequences I never could have anticipated, and that some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. Your support during difficult times means everything. If this story is resonating with you, please consider subscribing and sharing your own experiences in the comments below. 3 weeks after Jenny's arrest, I was working 18-hour days and slowly losing my mind. The news of her embezzlement had spread through Chicago's small business community like wildfire. Despite my efforts to keep things quiet, word had gotten out, and the whispers followed me everywhere. At networking events, in coffee shops, even at the grocery store. People stared and whispered about the woman whose trusted employee had stolen over $40,000. Sarah Mitchell? Isn't she the one whose office manager robbed her blind? I'd overheard that exact conversation while waiting in line at Starbucks the morning everything fell apart for the second time. The Morrison project had been a disaster. Despite working around the clock, Mike and I couldn't deliver what we'd promised without the resources their payment should have provided. When I finally had to tell them their $15,000 was gone, stolen by my employee, Mr. Morrison's reaction still haunts me. "Ms. Mitchell, with all due respect, your internal personnel problems are not our concern. We paid for services, and we expect to receive them. If you can't deliver what we contracted for, we'll be forced to pursue legal action to recover our payment." Legal action. The words every small business owner dreads. The Chen family restaurant project had gone even worse. Mrs. Chen, a 60-year-old immigrant who'd worked for 20 years to save enough money to renovate her family's restaurant, actually cried when I told her what happened. "My daughter's wedding is next month," she said through tears. "We were counting on the new website and social media presence to bring in enough extra business to pay for the reception. That $8,000, it was our whole savings. I ended up using my personal savings to hire freelancers to complete both projects, but the damage to my reputation was already done. Within a month, 3 other clients had terminated their contracts, citing concerns about financial security and project completion capabilities. The stress was destroying me physically. I'd lost 15 pounds, developed insomnia, and started having panic attacks whenever the phone rang. Every call could be another client demanding answers, another creditor, or another reporter wanting to write about the small business owner betrayed by trusted employee. Mike was doing his best to keep the company running, but the financial strain was enormous. We'd had to lay off 4 employees, people I'd worked with for years, who'd done nothing wrong but got caught in the aftermath of Jenny's actions. "I'm sorry, Marcus," I'd said to our creative director, a talented 29-year-old with 2 young kids. "This isn't about your performance. You've been amazing. It's just, we can't afford to keep everyone on staff right now." The look of confusion and hurt in his eyes broke my heart. These weren't just employees. They were people with mortgages and families and dreams, all suffering because of one person's addiction and poor choices. But the hardest part was the personal betrayal. I'd considered Jenny a friend. She'd been to my apartment for dinner parties, met my parents when they visited from Wisconsin, celebrated with me when we landed our biggest client. The realization that she'd been systematically stealing from me while looking me in the eye and laughing at my jokes felt like emotional torture. I started going to therapy, something I'd never thought I'd need. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a counselor who specialized in workplace trauma, helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of grief. "You're not just mourning the loss of money," she explained during our second session. "You're mourning the loss of trust, the loss of your sense of safety in your own business, and the loss of a relationship you valued." She was right, but understanding it didn't make it hurt less. The legal proceedings were moving slowly but steadily forward. Jenny had been indicted on federal wire fraud charges and state embezzlement charges. Her lawyer had approached me about a plea agreement that would involve her pleading guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and agreeing to make restitution. "The problem," Jenny's lawyer had explained during a conference call, "is that Ms. Rodriguez has no assets and significant debts. Even with the best intentions, meaningful restitution is unlikely in the near future." Translation: I was never getting my money back. The FBI investigation had also uncovered even more disturbing details about Jenny's gambling addiction. Agent Torres had called to update me on their findings. "Ms. Mitchell, we've traced her gambling activities across 17 different online platforms over the past 2 years. The total losses exceed $120,000 when you include her personal funds and the money she borrowed from friends and family." $120,000? She was what the gambling industry calls a VIP player. Some of these sites were actively encouraging her to bet larger amounts, offering her bonuses and incentives to keep playing. They knew she was losing massive amounts of money, and they kept pushing her to gamble more. The predatory nature of the online gambling industry made me sick. They'd identified Jenny as someone with a serious problem, and instead of helping her, they'd exploited her addiction for profit. But the most heartbreaking part of this whole ordeal happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I was leaving the office late, as had become my habit, when I saw a familiar figure sitting in her car in the parking lot. It was Jenny's mother, Mrs. Rodriguez. I walked over to her car, and she rolled down the window. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past month. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what are you doing here?" "Sarah, mija, I had to come talk to you. I had to apologize for what my daughter did to you." My heart broke for this woman who'd done nothing wrong, but raised a daughter who'd made terrible choices. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this isn't your fault. She called me from jail yesterday," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "She told me everything, not just what she stole from you, but all the money she took from the family. The $3,000 I gave her for car repairs that she gambled away, the money her sister lent her, even the $500 I gave her for her birthday last year." I didn't know what to say. Jenny's addiction had devastated not just my business, but her entire family. "I brought you something," Mrs. Rodriguez said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out an envelope. "It's not much, only $800, but it's everything I have in my savings account. I know it doesn't come close to what she stole, but I wanted to give you something." I stared at the envelope, feeling overwhelmed by this woman's generosity and devastated by the situation. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I can't take your savings. This isn't your responsibility." "Please," she said, pressing the envelope into my hands. "I need to do this, for my own peace of mind. Jenny destroyed so much, hurt so many people. Let me try to fix just a little bit of it." I took the envelope, not because I needed the money, but because I could see that this kind, generous woman needed to feel like she was helping somehow. The weight of those $800 in my hands felt heavier than the $43,000 Jenny had stolen. Mrs. Rodriguez, I want you to know that I don't blame you or your family for what Jenny did. She made her own choices, and the consequences are hers to face. She's my baby, the older woman said, sobbing now. No matter what she did, she's still my baby, and I failed her somehow. I should have seen the signs, should have gotten her help before it went this far. As I watched Mrs. Rodriguez drive away, I realized that Jenny's addiction and crimes had created ripples of pain that extended far beyond my business. She'd hurt her family, betrayed her friends, and damaged the lives of everyone who cared about her. That night, I went home and made a decision that would change the course of my recovery. I was going to rebuild my business, but I was also going to do something to prevent other business owners from experiencing what I'd gone through. But first, I had to survive the final, most devastating blow that was coming in just 2 weeks' time. 6 months after Jenny's sentencing, 18 months in federal prison and 5 years probation, I was finally ready to tell the end of this story. The final blow I'd been dreading came not from her legal case, but from an unexpected phone call on a December morning. It was Detective Reeves from the Chicago Police Department. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm calling with an update about Ms. Rodriguez. She's been hospitalized." My heart stopped. What happened? "She attempted suicide in her cell last week. Continuar editar. She attempted suicide in her cell last week. She's stable now, but she left a note specifically asking to speak with you." I sat down heavily in my office chair, the same chair where this nightmare had begun 6 months earlier. Despite everything Jenny had done to me, the thought of her trying to take her own life was devastating. Will she be okay? Physically, yes. Mentally, that's harder to say. The prison psychiatrist thinks the reality of her situation finally hit her. The length of her sentence, the destroyed relationships, the fact that her gambling debts mean she'll probably never be financially stable again. I stared out my office window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the woman who'd once sat across from this desk, laughing about client quirks and planning office holiday parties. Did she say what she wanted to talk to me about? No, but Ms. Mitchell, you should know, you're under no obligation to visit her. Given what she put you through, no one would blame you if you chose not to. After hanging up, I sat alone in my office for over an hour, trying to decide what to do. Part of me was still angry at Jenny for the chaos she'd brought into my life, but another part of me remembered the broken woman who'd confessed everything to me that October morning, and I knew I couldn't ignore her request. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Jenny in the visiting room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Pekin, Illinois. She looked frail and hollow-eyed, nothing like the vibrant person I'd once known. "Sarah," she said, tears immediately starting to flow. "I can't believe you came." "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but I needed to hear what you wanted to say." Jenny took a shaky breath. "I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just for the money, but for everything. For betraying your trust, for destroying your sense of security, for hurting all those innocent people who worked for you." I remained silent, letting her continue. "I also wanted to tell you something that might help you understand, even if it doesn't excuse what I did." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "My gambling addiction, it wasn't just about money or excitement. It was about escape. Escape from what? From feeling ordinary. From being just another office manager making $42,000 a year, living paycheck to paycheck, watching other people succeed while I stayed in the same place." Her voice cracked. "When I was gambling, especially when I was winning, I felt powerful. I felt like I was outsmarting the system, like I was special." Jenny wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But the terrible irony is that in trying to escape being ordinary, I became something much worse. I became someone who betrayed the best boss and friend I'd ever had." I felt my own eyes welling up. "Jenny, if you'd just talked to me about feeling stuck or wanting more opportunities—" "I know," she interrupted. "I know you would have helped me find ways to grow professionally, maybe even become a partner in the business someday. But asking for help felt like admitting weakness, and my pride wouldn't let me do that." We sat in silence for a moment. both of us crying for different reasons. Sarah, there's something else. The suicide attempt. It wasn't just about guilt or self-pity. I realized that my addiction had turned me into someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look you in the eye while stealing from you. That scared me more than prison, more than anything. Jenny leaned forward slightly. But lying in that hospital bed, I made a decision. I'm going to spend every day of my sentence getting help and figuring out how to make amends, not just to you, but to everyone I hurt. What does that look like? I've joined Gamblers Anonymous here in prison. I'm working with a counselor who specializes in addiction, and I'm writing letters to everyone I stole from or lied to, my family, my friends, your other employees who lost their jobs. She paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just taking responsibility. As I listened to Jenny talk about her recovery efforts, I realized something had shifted inside me. The anger I'd been carrying for 6 months was still there, but it was no longer consuming me. Jenny, I need you to know that what you did nearly destroyed my business and definitely destroyed my ability to trust people easily. I'm still in therapy dealing with the emotional aftermath. She nodded, accepting the weight of her actions. But, I continued, I also need you to know that I don't want you to die. I want you to get better, to find a way to rebuild your life when you get out of here. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. When I left the prison that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of closure. Not complete healing, that would take much longer, but the beginning of it. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the project I'd been planning since Mrs. Rodriguez's visit. I was going to create something positive from this devastating experience. Working with Mike and our remaining staff, I developed a comprehensive guide for small business owners about preventing employee fraud and recognizing the signs of financial addiction. We called it the Trust and Verify Handbook, and it covered everything from implementing proper financial controls to understanding the psychology of workplace embezzlement. Sarah, this is really good, Mike said after reviewing the first draft. You're turning your worst experience into something that could help thousands of other business owners. The handbook was more successful than I'd ever imagined. Within 3 months of its release, it had been downloaded over 10,000 times. I started receiving emails from business owners across the country sharing their own stories of employee theft and thanking me for creating a resource that helped them protect their companies. One email particularly stood out. Dear Sarah, I read your handbook just 2 weeks before my bookkeeper was supposed to start managing our online banking. Something in your section about behavioral changes made me pause and investigate further. It turns out she had a serious gambling problem and had already embezzled money from her previous employer. Your guide literally saved my business. Thank you. Reading messages like that helped me understand that Jenny's betrayal, while devastating, had given me knowledge and insights that could prevent other people from experiencing the same trauma. A year after that prison visit, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Jenny, who was now 18 months into her sentence. Dear Sarah, it read, I wanted to update you on my progress and share some news that I hope will mean something to you. I've been working in the prison's financial literacy program, helping other inmates understand budgeting, debt management, and the dangers of gambling addiction. It's the most meaningful work I've ever done, and it's taught me that my experience, terrible as it was, can be used to help other people avoid making the same mistakes. I've also been accepted into a correspondence degree program in addiction counseling. When I'm released, I want to work with people struggling with gambling addiction. I know I can never undo the harm I caused you and so many others, but maybe I can prevent future harm. Finally, I wanted you to know that I've started a small savings account with money I earned from my prison job. I know $47 a month isn't much, but I'm committed to paying you back every penny, even if it takes the rest of my life. It's not about the money. It's about taking concrete action to make amends. I think about you and the business often, and I pray that you've been able to rebuild and find peace. You deserved so much better than what I put you through. With genuine remorse and hope for your continued success, Jennifer Rodriguez. As I finished reading her letter, I realized that both of our lives had been forever changed by the events of that October morning. Jenny had lost her freedom, her reputation, and her financial security, but she was using that experience to become someone who might actually help others. I had lost money, employees, and my sense of security, but I had gained insights that were helping business owners across the country protect themselves. Neither of us would ever be the same people we were before her addiction consumed our lives, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Today, 2 years after Jenny's confession in my office, Mitchell Marketing is stronger than ever. We've implemented robust financial controls, diversified our client base, and built the kind of processes that would make it virtually impossible for one person to cause such damage again. More importantly, I've learned to trust again, carefully, with proper safeguards, but genuinely. I still think about Jenny sometimes, especially when I'm working on updates to the Trust and Verify handbook, or when I receive emails from business owners who've avoided similar betrayals. Her addiction and poor choices created tremendous pain for many people, but they also created an opportunity for education, prevention, and ultimately, a different kind of redemption. The money she stole is long gone, and realistically, I'll probably never be fully repaid. But the knowledge gained from that experience and the positive impact it's had on other business owners has value that far exceeds the financial loss. If you're a business owner watching this, please learn from my experience. Trust your employees, but verify their actions. Implement proper financial controls. Pay attention to behavioral changes. And remember that addiction can turn even the most trustworthy people into someone you don't recognize. Most importantly, if you're struggling with gambling addiction or know someone who is, please get help before it destroys your life and the lives of people who care about you. The resources are available and recovery is possible, but only if you're willing to admit you have a problem and take action to address it. Thank you for following this difficult but important story. If it's helped you in any way, please share it with other business owners who might benefit from learning about the realities of workplace embezzlement and the devastating effects of gambling addiction. Sometimes our worst experiences can become our most valuable lessons, both for ourselves and for others. That's not a reason to be grateful for betrayal or addiction, but it is a reason to find meaning and purpose in the aftermath of devastating events. I hope Jenny finds peace and purpose in her recovery, and I hope my experience helps other business owners protect themselves and their employees from similar tragedies. That's the best outcome I can imagine from the worst betrayal I've ever experienced.